Welcome to the latest edition of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute. I'm Jonathan Hesson, and in today's edition, we will focus predominantly on the northern Israeli arena vis-a-vis Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Yemen, and much more. To deliberate the latest, let's now turn to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Dr. Mike Duran, the Senior Fellow and Director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at Hudson Institute, formerly the Senior Director at the National Security Council in Washington for the North Africa and Middle East regions. It's good to see you, Mike. And immediately I'll ask, what are the top points that we should focus on during today's discussion?
Well, thanks for having me, Jonathan. It's great to be here, and it's great to be here with such a distinguished panel. The top points are, of course, Nasrallah is dead, Nasrallah is dead, and oh, by the way, Nasrallah is dead. This is just an amazing development. Last Friday, the Israelis dropped some 83 tons of explosives on the Dakhia in Beirut, killing the leader of Hezbollah, who is, of course, the second most important leader in Iran's axis of resistance after Ali Khamenei himself, the supreme leader of Iran. This, in my view, I'm very interested to hear the assessments of our colleagues here. In my view, this is really a major turning point in the war. I think we are now, we can say conclusively, this is the beginning of the Israeli victory. And this action of killing Nasrallah comes at the end of a long string of really amazing intelligence and operational successes. You remember it started, I mean, we could go back further, but there was Fuad Shukr, the chief of staff of Hezbollah in Beirut. The Israelis killed him. We were going to have a major attack by Iran. We were going to have a major attack by Hezbollah. Then Iran dropped out of the attack, and we only had an attack by Hezbollah, which the Israelis foiled. And then from there, they went on and did this miraculous string of events, such as the pager attack and the walkie-talkies, followed by taking out all of the leadership of the Radwan forces and so on. All of this together, combined with the killing of Hania in Tehran and elsewhere, has really shifted the balance between Israel and Iran. This war is not a war for Gaza. It's not a Palestinian-Israeli war. It's an Iranian-Israeli war. And Israel has turned the tables. And I'll just end with this, Jonathan, that unfortunately here in Washington, there seems to be no appreciation, at least I see no signs in the White House, of an appreciation of the great strategic opportunity that Israel has handed the United States on a platter, that is to really severely weaken not just Iran, but the entire axis of resistance. Unfortunately, the Americans are caught in this mindset of trying to achieve some kind of balance. They are restraining the Israelis from going in on the ground in Lebanon, which is necessary to really secure the victory of Israel over Hezbollah. And this is unfortunate, but let's not let the bad news from Washington blind us from seeing that what's happened in the last few weeks is really miraculous. It's not really a miracle. It was done by hard work, hard planning, courageous operations by Israel, and it's really a turning point, I think.
It is really amazing. Last week you defined it as a paradigm shift, or we defined it as a paradigm shift, and just in 1 week to make that quantum leap into a victory lap, basically, it's something really, really impressive. But let's now turn to Central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Cooperwasser, formerly the Director General at the Ministry for Strategic Affairs, the head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessment Division, and much, much more. We'll leave it at that. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to ask you to characterize what Dr. Durant just mentioned, since in spite of all those successes, both on an operational as well as on a tactical level, with the opportunity to translate that into a strategic success, it seems like, on the one hand, we're hearing Ayatollah Ali Khamenei come out and declare victory for Hezbollah somehow, and on the other hand, we're hearing the deputy of the slain Hezbollah leader, namely Naim Qassem, stating earlier today that from their perspective, they're going to fight no matter what. How should we translate all of that and interpret that for the viewers?
Well, Hezbollah, first of all, thank you for having me. To the point, I think Hezbollah is suffering a very difficult situation, and so do the Iranians. And the way to cope with this state of shock that they are suffering from, the best thing to do is to stick to the things you were used to do in the past. So since Nasrallah's legacy is still very well familiar to everybody, his last statement was that he's going to continue fighting and continue supporting Gaza and the Hamas in Gaza and so on and so forth, and will not allow the citizens of northern Israel to go back to their communities unless there is a ceasefire in Gaza that would allow Hamas to stay in power. So what we heard from Naim Qassem was repeating Nasrallah's declarations, but there's a big difference. Without Nasrallah, there's a much less ability to turn these statements into reality. And this is the problem of Hezbollah right now. They still have most of their manpower. They still have most of their capabilities available to them, especially when it comes to launching rockets towards northern Israel, as we are facing every hour now. But the zeal and the charisma of Nasrallah are missing, and so are a lot of people in the upper echelon of Hezbollah. So Hezbollah is a very weak animal now, and many people in Lebanon and in Syria are looking at this situation, trying to take advantage of it. Unlike the Americans, who are very hesitant to do that, many forces inside Lebanon and in Syria are trying now to translate the new situation, the turn of the tables, into an opportunity and change the situation. And this operation was called a new order. They're trying to establish a new order in our northern border. And on top of that, Iran, that has now the first task of the Iranians is to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't fall apart, is very worried because they thought Hezbollah is going to be their protector in case that anybody would try to carry out any attack against them. And now they realize that this protection is very weak and cannot actually function as a real defense against even an Israeli attack. And they were very worried because the Israelis did what they did in spite of the Americans. Well, with some support of the Americans, but in spite of the Americans. The American reaction was, okay, nice that you did it, but, and there's a long list of buts. And don't carry out any ground operation, don't do this, don't do that, don't drag us into a regional war. And what we're seeing is that what the Iranians are saying is that the Israelis not necessarily do what the Americans are telling them to do. And this means that Iran itself is in a very vulnerable situation. And what they need to do is, first of all, take care of Hezbollah and make sure it doesn't fall apart. But on top of that, they have to improve their defensives, and they have to take revenge in order to deter Israel from doing more than that they've done so far. And it's very difficult for them to find a way to take revenge, because they want to make sure that revenge would not lead to an Israeli strike against them. And what I'm worried in all of that situation is that they might think that the way to build a new line of defense and deterrence is to move forward with the nuclear project, where they are moving anyhow forward quite considerably in the last couple of years. So they are very close to having the capability to break out, and they might consider that step, and this was going to probably lead to Israel to take further steps, with or without the Americans.
Indeed, very important points, particularly also on the nuclear front. But let's now turn elsewhere in central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the head of the Intelligence Directorate at Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to touch on something that General Kuperwasser mentioned, and that is that there is a change within the Lebanese society, which is very sectarian. Of course, you have there the Sunnah, the Christian, Maronites, the other streams of Christianity as well, but also, of course, the Druze and the Shia, which the Shia at this point in time are not necessarily one cohesive bloc, but rather there are all kind of elements that are confronting the position of Hezbollah. Nonetheless, when you look at the current state of play, is the ground ripe to challenge Hezbollah's grip over Lebanon?
Let me first of all refer to the status of Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah controlled Lebanon. Actually, you can define, not in very nice words, but you can define it that Hezbollah is a movement or ideological and, of course, Islamic movement that has a country of its own, and this is Lebanon, because they control Lebanon totally. First of all, the Lebanese army is very weak. It cannot challenge Hezbollah. Second, Hezbollah controls even the political arena. They have members in the parliament, they have ministers within the government, and they prevent or deny the ability to appoint a new president for over a year, because they support somebody, a certain person, the Christians support another one, and they don't agree within themselves, and that was the situation as long as Nasrallah was in power. Now Nasrallah is gone, and soon enough they will appoint somebody else. Probably it's going to be Hashem Safiuddin, who is his cousin and the son-in-law of Qasem Soleimani. And as I've been told and read, it's considered to be more radical even than Nasrallah, but it will take him time to get over and to get into power in such a shaky situation. But nevertheless, I don't see the Lebanese taking advantage of this situation and trying to disarm Hezbollah or to weaken them, because the Lebanese are very, tolerant, they are very passive. They don't really take any action against somebody within their countries, and Hezbollah controls this country for about more than 30 years. And I don't see that the major change is going to be right now, even though Nasrallah is gone.
Indeed. Well, Dr. Duran, just a side note, has tweeted earlier yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, that he gives Safiuddin at least 3 weeks to survive the current wave of targeted eliminations. Let's see if that's true or not, but we'll leave that to other authorities to determine. Let's now turn to Madrid, Spain, where we're joined by Dr. Rafael Barraji, formerly National Security Advisor in Spain, right now the CEO of Worldwide Strategy. It's great to see you, Rafael. I'd like to... Pleasure. It's always a pleasure. I would like to pick your brain specifically on the strategic implications of this move on a regional scale. Can Israel seize this opportunity to not only capitalize it, as we heard here time and again, as a first step of victory into victory, or is this now going to be a whole composition of a new Middle East from a strategic perspective, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu highlighted in his earlier speech yesterday?
Well, I think the Israeli government in the last month was trying to accomplish one goal in Lebanon, was to change the rule of the game south of the Litani River. But thanks to the operational and intelligence capabilities, and we have seen the last weeks, what is achieving now is a new rule of the game for the whole Middle East, from the Levant to Tehran. I think everyone has understood already, or should understand now, that Israel is not defeated. On the contrary, has recovered very well. And despite all the images and signal of internal divisions, differences between the political authorities and the military, Israel is able, willing to do whatever it takes to eliminate its enemies. So I think the first strategic lesson should be for us to remember and misquote John Lennon. We need to give war a chance, because you can achieve victory through military means, In the Western world, we have become post-heroic, post-military societies. I don't remember any time soon where we had a clear-cut victory in a war, maybe the Falkland Island and Margaret Thatcher. But thanks to Israel, we can again say that victory is achievable, victory is possible, and Israel is in the path to win over all the enemies, on Hamas in Gaza, on Hezbollah in Lebanon, and who knows where else.
Indeed. Dr. Duran, give war a chance, something that I should have quoted Dr. Bardaki, since he has mentioned this already on this panel in the past, but nonetheless, what should the world give war a chance to recalibrate the Middle East and ensure that victory is achievable? However, with one anecdote, at a time when, as you and also General Kuperwasser and General Sofrin have mentioned, there are constraints which are imposed upon Israel. The current administration has frustrated Israeli intentions to launch a ground maneuver as early as even today, but nonetheless, there are other options, and there are plenty of opportunities to implement within that context.
Yes, Jonathan, I think that we do need to give war a chance. Right now, the problem the Israelis have is that their war aims and the American war aims are misaligned. The Americans are simply trying to stop the war. They're saying war is bad, total victory. The implication of what they're saying is war is bad, total victory is unachievable. What we need is a balance. And if they had their way, then we would stop the war in Gaza, and that means that Hamas would remain in political control of Gaza, and we would keep the status quo in Lebanon. The ceasefire in Gaza would lead to a ceasefire in southern Lebanon, on the northern border with Israel, and that would keep the status quo in place, which is intolerable to the Israelis because the military positions of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon threaten Israel's northern communities. The Israeli war aims are to end the threat to their communities in the north. And that's an absolutely achievable goal. And it's a goal that's in the interest of the United States, not just because it will bring peace to Israel's north, but it will also be a severe blow as we've been saying, to the axis of resistance. American policy right now is actually well aligned with the Iranian policy. Iran, Hezbollah are saying, if you, America, bring a ceasefire in Gaza, we will bring a ceasefire to the rest of the region with the Houthis, Hezbollah, and from Iran itself. And so America is actually aligned in its war aims with Iran. This is the wrong place for the United States to be. It should be supporting its ally against the resistance axis, which seeks to undermine the American order in the entire Middle East.
Indeed. General Kuperwasser, I'd like to pick your brain, since obviously since October 17th, the Houthis, Nasrallah, from Yemen have been quite deliberate in efforts to thwart maritime shipping through the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and the adjacent waterways, while in tandem also launching sporadic attacks towards Israel. Their last sporadic attack included a ballistic missile launched towards Ben Gurion International Airport while Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was set to land in the country. Israel responded with force. What can you tell us about that? And is this a strong enough signal, or should Israel be more deliberate in its actions?
Well, I think it's a strong enough signal. We flew dozens of airplanes all the way to Yemen, which is 1,800 kilometers away, and showed what kind of a damage we can cause. And I think that not only the Yemenites were watching and feeling what happened, but also many others in the Middle East, mainly the Iranians, were watching very carefully, because the distance between Israel and Hodeidah and Ras Isa, the targets, is longer than the distance between Israel and Tehran. So it's something that everybody took notice of. And I think it clarifies that the rules of the game have changed. it's not anymore just between us and the Palestinians to decide who's going to rule Gaza in the future. That's still a war that's being fought, but it's a war over the situation in the Middle East entirely. Who is going to be more impactful in the Middle East? And it's clear. It was clear that in the beginning, after October 7th, the feeling of the Iranians was that they are shaping the Middle East in the way they want, and that Israel is getting weaker and the United States is weak. And this allows them to take the initiative and try to put Israel and the United States in the corner. And we saw during the last couple of months all kinds of things that indicated that things are changing. The decision of Israel to take over the Philadelphia corridor was very important in this respect. The attacks against Fuad Shukr, the elimination of Ania, the attack in Masyaf in Syria, all kinds of things that if you add them all together, and the ongoing hitting of key figures in Hezbollah all the way, were indicating that the axis of evil, as Mike calls it, the axis of resistance, they call themselves, should worry about the fact that the war gets longer and longer, and eventually something is going to happen on the Israeli side. And that's exactly what happened in the last couple of weeks. And we are watching a totally new situation where Israel is shaping the situation in the Middle East and putting the Iranian axis in the corner, losing their capabilities to defend themselves. And look what damage they suffer. And this is a lesson that the entire Middle East should learn. And I hope, sincerely, that the Saudis will be the first to draw lessons from this new situation and change their attitude towards being friends with Israel. Normalization is something that shouldn't be depending on what's going to happen in the Palestinian arena, but it's something good for Saudi Arabia to be able to take advantage of the growing strengths of Israel and its ability to defend itself and to deter those who want to harm it.
General Sofrin, we don't have very much time left, and we still have both you and Dr. Rafael Barrahi, of course, but I'd like to ask you, since there are two schools of thought right now in Iran being deliberated. The first one, RGC, is pushing for some sort of limited attack against Israel to ensure a certain sense of deterrence, at least, not only vis-a-vis Israel, but also vis-a-vis their own population, which is not necessarily very fond of this regime. And the other school of thought in the deliberations includes the one that urges more restraint, fearing that if they do so, the response of Israel, which of course will target vital infrastructure in Iran, will be very damaging to their economy. What should we learn out of that?
I think, and I try to be very, very short and very concentrated. I think that Iran is facing the dilemma that you mentioned, and I think that right now they have great things to think about. Mainly, they saw, first of all, the demonstration of Israel's capabilities of fire and power and intelligence, and being accurate and being able to monitor and to detect and to pinpoint whoever is needed. And they saw the demonstration yesterday in Yemen, and they understand the message that they have oil of their own. And I believe that they didn't respond for the killing of Hania in Tehran, not because they planned something great, but they think that I think that they understood that they don't want to go into a large war with Israel because they endanger their capabilities, their own capabilities, and especially what we call the nuclear facilities. And I think that this one is the main consideration of Iran, not to escalate right now and not to go into a larger war with Israel that will give Israel the cause to act and to hit those facilities.
They are afraid. It comes down to that, since they know full well what the consequences of their actions are. But what does this signal, Dr. Bardahi, to both China and Russia, since the constraints imposed on Israel by Washington have forced it to think outside of the box, of course, and to act very creatively, let's call it that way, but also when it was very deliberate, we saw that image of what it can include such a wide-scale offensive. At the same time, very vigorous constraints are imposed on Central Command, on its allies and partners operating in the region, from bringing about that necessarily victory, understanding that those constraints won't always be there. What can this be as a signal to the enemies and adversaries of the West?
Well, I'm not so optimistic as you seem to be about the lessons learned by the Chinese and the Russians. I think they could consider the Middle East as a bubble, and that the Western powers, particularly the US, is not going to react anytime soon like the Israelis did. So I don't think they will change their calculus in the near term, unfortunately. But let me say a couple of things more. As a European in this panel, let me say that I'm totally ashamed that people like Macron express his sympathy and solidarity with the Lebanese people because of the losses of Hezbollah. I think he should take the first plane to go to Beirut and accompany his body to the funeral. But he's so hypocritical, like many other leaders, that he won't do it because they are cowards, basically. That's one thing. I think all the European leaders that stick to the old tradition that, never war, it's a mistake, should be ashamed of themselves and all the condemnation they have done to Israel in the last 12 months. And the second thing is also for the Israelis themselves. I think there is a big window of opportunity from here to January, whoever is in the White House at the time, for any actions that can be taken or should be taken if they are needed. I'm not advocating for any major blow to anyone, but if Israel is under existential threat and there is any need to counter that, there is no better place and better time to do it than now.
Dr. Bardahi, General Sofrin, General Kuperwasser, and Dr. Duran, thank you so very much for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well until our next edition of Deep Dive. From here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day. TV7 Israel invites you to watch and hear some of the most knowledgeable experts, most of whom partook in creating policies shaping this region today. Join us for Jerusalem Studio.